Okay, in this particular lecture, I'm going to be talking about some of the important characters in Virginia Woolf's Mrs. Dalloway. As I've already discussed in my previous lecture, this novel is written in the stream of consciousness technique, and we are offered a set of interior monologues into the mindscapes of each of these characters. Okay. And I've also mentioned that this is largely a semi-autobiographical novel, so a lot of Woolf's personal life is reflected in the lives of the major characters of this novel. Okay, so today we'll be discussing two major characters in the novel. We'll be discussing the character of Clarissa Dalloway, and we'll be also discussing the character of her alter ego, that is, who is Septimus Smith. Clarissa Dalloway, she's a 51-year-old woman, and she has married Richard Dalloway. They have a daughter, 17-year-old Elizabeth Dalloway. And we see that Clarissa, she's given to introspection. That means she likes to spend time by herself. She is given to her own thoughts, and she's constantly trying to juggle between two worlds. Okay. One is the external world, that is the world of high society England, where she is throwing a party for her husband, Richard Dalloway. She's inviting people, and the novel begins with her going out to buy flowers. So, there's this external world, and there is the internal world. The internal world it takes us inside the mind of Clarissa. And you will see that often there is a disjuncture or a disconnect between both these worlds, okay? And Clarissa is constantly trying to reconcile the two worlds, okay? And she's also sometimes given to suicidal thoughts. She broods over the uselessness or the meaninglessness of life. She ponders over the effects of World War I, and she also broods over her choice of Richard. I have already discussed in my previous lecture how Clarissa had rejected the proposal of Peter Walsh, a childhood friend, and had chosen instead to marry Richard because he could give her access to a high society life. Okay. So Peter reappears as a character in this novel. He is seeing a very young girl in India, and he has returned to London to secure his divorce papers, and he drops in by the house of Mrs. Dalloway, Clarissa, and Peter is very judgmental about Clarissa and the choices that she has made in her life. So Clarissa is given to constant introspection, and one of the things she ponders about is whether she would have been happier with Peter rather than Richard. Okay, she also thinks about Sally Seton, her childhood friend once again, and I told you Woolf was a bisexual woman, and one of the persons she was very close to, her lover, Vita Sackville-West, who was also a writer herself and part of the Bloomsbury group. So Sally Seton is we see her in flashbacks. She's a feminist. Okay, she believes in the women's suffragist movement, women's right to equality, and she's a cigarette smoking, short-haired kind of girl who Clarissa in her youth was deeply attracted to, and the two of them share a kiss. And I've already told you yesterday in my previous lecture how this kiss is described as not so much as an erotic moment, but rather a very precious, a very pure moment in the life of Clarissa. Okay, and then Clarissa, of course, muses and thinks that she couldn't marry Sally. She did not marry Peter. It was her own choice. So she instead chose Richard. And she's constantly given to suicidal thoughts. And this novel is structured, it takes place over the course of one day. It is structured like, so you have 10 o'clock, then 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock. So it's hourly structured. And you have these long interior monologues inside the minds of each of these characters. Okay. So also Clarissa has a kind of troubled relationship with her daughter Elizabeth. You see that Elizabeth has a teacher. Her teacher is this lady called Doris Gilman. She's a German by ancestry. And since this is the aftermath of World War I, you see that the World War I was fought between the Allied powers and between Germany and others. So, Germany was the enemy. So because Doris Gilman was of German ancestry, she has been fired from her job as a history teacher. So now she fends for herself by giving tuitions, and she gives tuition to Elizabeth, who is Clarissa's daughter. And she has a strong control over Elizabeth, okay? She's also someone who is deeply given to religion, okay? She loves the Bible and she loves reading from the Bible. And Clarissa, like Woolf herself, is an atheist. She does not believe in any institutionalized form of religion, okay? So the fact that Doris Gilman has a very strong influence or formative control over her daughter Elizabeth, this also creates some kind of a jealousy, envy in the mind of Clarissa. Okay. Now coming to the character of Septimus Warren Smith, I've already told you that Septimus is in many ways an alter ego of Clarissa in this novel. Okay, Septimus, he took part in the First World War, and even though the war is now over, we see that inside his mind, he's still stuck in the moment of the war. He lost his best friend Evans in the war, and there are subtle hints that the two of them might have shared a homosexual relationship. And we see here that Septimus, he suffers from a condition called shell shock. That is, he's afraid of even the slightest sound around him. So he has his own way of interpreting reality. And just like Clarissa, he also tries to juggle between two worlds, the external world and the internal world of his mind. Sorry, my video had got paused due to a technical glitch. So coming back to the character of Septimus, you see that he's someone who is caught in his internal mindscape. So just like Clarissa, he also has an external world and an internal world, and he chooses to give a sort of precedence to his internal world. Okay, he's married to this woman called Clarissa Smith, who comes from a very humble background. She stitches hats for a living, and we see that Lucrezia, she's devoted to her husband, and she tries to take him to different doctors, to different physicians, to try and bring about a cure in his condition. And their physician, Dr. Holmes, recommends them to a psychiatrist called William Bradshaw. And once again, Woolf, in her personal life, she was deeply distrustful of psychiatrists. Okay, that is because Woolf was herself suffering from anxiety and manic depression and different other kinds of condition, and she did not have a good amount of faith in the institution of psychiatry. Okay, so William Bradshaw is someone we introduced to him. He believes that society needs to have a proper sense of balance, and balance between rationality and irrationality, balance between what is right and what is wrong, what is good and what is bad, etc. And if the scale of balance is slightly tipped, then William Bradshaw believes that you go mad, you're insane. So after Lucrezia takes Septimus to William Bradshaw, he immediately diagnoses that Septimus is loony. That is, he has lost his sense of balance and he's insane. And he recommends that Septimus be sent to an asylum in the country. He's be separated from his wife, and he be sent on solitude. A solitude sort of incarceration or imprisonment in the asylum, which will be a cure for him. And we see that at the end of the novel, towards the end of the novel, when Sir William Bradshaw's people come to take Septimus to the psychiatric home, we see that Septimus will commit suicide by jumping out of the window. It's a shocking moment for his wife Rezia, but in a sense, Septimus's choice of suicide is a self-willed choice. He chooses death over being trapped or incarcerated by a psychiatric institution. What I'm trying to say here is that Septimus, for him, society itself is like a psychiatric institution. Society creates these boxes and it tries to make you fit within these boxes. If you do not fit within the boxes, society labels you as mad, as insane, and tries to lock you up. So Septimus refuses to give in to these demands of a society that chooses to put him inside a box, the box of insanity, just like Woolf herself, and instead he chooses death. So for him, committing suicide can be described as an act of freedom. He chooses to free himself by killing himself rather than be imprisoned by the walls of an asylum and by extension by the walls of society. And in many ways this mirrors Clarissa's own thoughts, because she many times is driven to the edge of suicide, but then she sort of understands, she returns to reality, and as I've already told you in our previous lecture, the two of them are alter egos of each other, and both of them are in different ways reflections of Woolf's own personality. So Septimus's death in a way enables Clarissa to continue with her own life, to go on with her own life. Okay, the two never actually meet each other in the novel. There is no real physical encounter between the two of them. Sir William Bradshaw is one of the persons who is invited to Clarissa's party, and it is from Sir William Bradshaw that Clarissa hears that a young man called Septimus Warren Smith, who was a patient of his, has committed suicide. And Clarissa thinks about this suicide a lot because she herself is driven to that point of killing herself, but at the end of the day, she chooses to continue with her life. Okay, so This particular lecture was primarily a discussion about these two central characters of the novel. Remember, both of them are very important. Though they come from different social classes, though their backgrounds are completely different, the two of them share a mental scape. Okay. Once again, given the fact that they are alter egos of each other, they share a mental perspective. Their mental build-up is similar, and both of them have to constantly juggle between the world of the external, the real world, and the internal world of the mind. And whereas Septimus, he chooses the act of death. It's a way of both revolting against society, like revolting against the shackles of society, and also an act of freedom. He chooses freedom by choosing death. Clarissa is someone who also is driven to the point of suicide, but she chooses to return back to reality at the end of the novel. Okay, so I will conclude my discussion here. If you have any questions, as always, you're free to ask me. Okay, thank you so much.